Good evening, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival. Thank you all for joining us for the final event of the 2020 Wisconsin Book Festival. We are delighted to be hosting Jane Smiley for her book, Perestroika in Paris. Jane, thank you so much for joining us from California. And our moderator this evening will be Jane Hamilton. Jane, thank you for joining us from just a little bit away here in Wisconsin. It's lovely to have you both. As we get started, I, as always, want to take a moment to say thank you to Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation. They have been absolutely unwavering all year, and frankly for the last 8 years, in their support of free cultural events, bringing authors to talk to the people of Wisconsin. And so I want to say thank you to them and all of the sponsors for keeping the Wisconsin Book Festival going throughout the pandemic and into 2021. I also want to mention to those of you watching, I assume that you're all literary fiction fans, and I have good news. The first event of 2021 will be a wonderful literary fiction event featuring Emily St. John Mandel for her book, The Glass Hotel, and she'll appear in conversation with Chloe Benjamin. So I think it's like 74 days away, Crowdcast tells me, but we have that to put on our calendars. I'll put that link in the chat for everyone. I just wanted to say welcome to Jane Hamilton, the author of many books, the Book of Ruth, The Excellent Lombards, and also a wonderful Wisconsin author who joins us from her orchard. And Jane Smiley, thank you so much for being here. I know it's been a long time coming, but you have deep Wisconsin roots. You also won the Pulitzer Prize for the book 1,000 Acres, and are a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Thank you so much for being here. We'll leave it to you both to lead the conversation. I'll see everyone at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connor.
Yes.
Jane, welcome to Wisconsin, which is sometimes great and is sometimes a little bit addled, but it's wonderful to pretend that you're actually among us in the state, and it's great to be able to talk to you. I just want to start by saying one thing and then asking you one thing, and I just want to say that it's been a pleasure to prepare this and think about your work, and you know, and it's been delightful to read your new book, and also read some of your other books that I've pulled off the shelf and gone back to, and the joy of reading you is that every sentence is a deep comfort and so beautifully crafted, and it's just a pleasure to be in your capacious mind and to be walking along with you in your clear-headed way. So
Wonderful
thank you.
compliment. Thank you very much.
And then number two, which is the first question, is that I've been reading 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel again, which is just such a it's a great resource for a teacher. It's inspiring to go back to just for a writer, and it's so big. You did so much in that year. But anyway, you write, if to live is to progress, if you're lucky, from foolishness to wisdom, then to write novels is to broadcast the various stages of your foolishness. This was true of me, you say. I didn't begin them by thinking I had a good subject of a novel. I began them by thinking that I had discovered important truths about the world that required communication. So I just wondered where and when the important truths for Perestroika in Paris came to you, revealed themselves.
Well, I'm not sure I considered them important truths, but I was in 2009, I was in Paris with my husband, and we happened to go across the Seine to the Place du Trocadero, which is up the hill, and it's in a beautiful spot. And we were sitting outside, and we were having the most wonderful French onion soup I had ever had. And as I remember, the reason we happened to be there was that we had been visiting a woman from Wisconsin who trains racehorses in France.
Of course you were.
And she was a totally interesting woman, and I'll tell you more about her if you ask. But anyway, having been there, um, I was looking around at what a beautiful place it was, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if a horse escaped from Auteuil racecourse and came into Paris and lived here? And of course, then I thought that's a stupid idea, but I could not resist it. And I began looking it up, and I began thinking. I looked on a lot of maps. I did a lot of walking around, and I began thinking, okay, how could it happen? Um, and that was that was the trigger. And then I had other books that I was doing. I was writing the trilogy and thinking and doing other books, kids' books too. But I just couldn't resist it. So I decided, I kept coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. And finally, I talked my publisher into publishing it.
Did you think at first that it would be for kids since it
I didn't even think about that aspect. Um, I I wanted the people and the animals and the situation. Um, I didn't want it to be watered down in particular. So I just let it come out. And then after it was done, I thought, is this for kids? I don't think so. Is it for grown-ups? I hope so. But I do think kids can read it. There's nothing too horrifying in it. So
definitely. What I mean, you have written for children, and as I think I said, I just read the Georges and the Jewels, and I hadn't read any of the series before, and I think it's a perfect book. It's got
oh,
everything in it, and it's focused, but I love that family, and they are have their quirks, but you don't judge anybody, and it has the mean girls, and it's just it's and it has a lot of technical stuff, and I have to say that my daughter was horsey for a while, and I would go to the barn with her, and the horse mothers would be talking endlessly about, oh, she missed her lead, and I was just so happy that my daughter hadn't broken her neck. But you in those books go into quite a bit of technical. Um, eh, there's a lot of technical stuff
oh,
in that book, I thought, and I was interested in every single detail in the way that I
oh.
wasn't when the horse mothers were talking about the same thing. So that's just
Well,
another
let me
testament to
say
your
that
talent.
the reason I did that was because when I moved to California, um, I hired a trainer for help with some of the young horses that I had, who had learned what he knew from a local horseman named Bill Dorrance. And they essentially invented in our neighborhood around here a new way of training horses, which is to be more insightful into the minds of the horses and then get the horses to connect with you. And I was just blown away by this. And I thought, okay, so sometime around 2009, which is when those books started to come out, I thought, okay, I need to write a series of books that incorporates this transition in horse training. So there's the is it six or five? No, there's the 5 books in the first series. And then one of the characters in the first series is a little girl, she's about 9, who when we were kids would have been called contrary. And I enjoyed her so much that I decided to write another set of 3 books about her.
Uh-huh.
And those just came out in the last 3 years. Those are the Ellen books. And they just made me laugh. They just made me laugh all the way through because she thinks for herself all the time.
Um, so is there a difference when you're approaching the book and it's going to be for kids as opposed to the adult?
Well, probably the difference is that I want the children and the young adults to learn something about the subject from what they're reading. So the thing that you noticed, where there are a lot of details about how the horses behaved, how they're going to be trained, that was one of the main goals
Mhm.
in those books, was to demonstrate a training way, a way of training that is good to the horses,
Mhm.
and then to demonstrate the horse's response. So
Mhm.
I think young adult books and children's books are about learning things, or at least that was my idea. And so
Mhm.
that was the point, one of the points of those books. But then I would be swept away by, the difference among the horses and the events in the lives of the families involved. And so that part I enjoyed too.
Mhm.
But they really focus on what the girls, Abby in one and Ellen in the other, what they're learning.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Um, well, I learned quite a bit about human beings and animals in your Paris book. But just before, it would be fun to hear you read some of it. But before I forget, can you tell us a little bit about the woman trainer that you visited in Paris, so we don't forget that?
Oh no, we mustn't forget that. So and she's gotten more and more successful. Her name is Gina Rarick. She came from Wisconsin. She went, I believe, to the University of Wisconsin, but it was a university in Wisconsin, and she majored in percussion. And then she went to work for, I guess it was the Milwaukee Herald.
Uh-huh.
And when it was bought up by the New York Herald Tribune, she didn't write about music in the newspaper. She wrote about finance. And when it was bought up by the New York Herald Tribune, they sent her to Paris to write about finance. And she was endlessly bored about finance. She said the market goes up, the market goes down, the market goes up, the market goes down. And so at some young age, I think she was 32 or something like that, she decided she was going to learn to ride. And she learned to ride a horse, and then she learned to do what they are allowed to do in France, which but not in the US, which is amateur horse racing.
That
And
sounds potentially very dangerous.
she's so brave. I thought she was such an interesting person. And then she just got into the business. She was a good trainer, and she got owners, and she got horses. And I still read all about her almost every day on Facebook, all the horses that are in the barn and what they're doing. And she posts videos and stuff. And she's gotten quite successful. And I don't know that she ever even went near a horse when she was a girl. She's totally interesting person.
Huh. And
And
were you just visiting her for the heck of
yeah,
it?
because what had happened was, we had blogged, we were blogging we were posting on a blog in the New York Times, called The Rail, which was a horse racing blog. And I happened to be going to France to do some book stuff, I think. And I decided to ask her if I could come for a visit and see the ranch, or see not the ranch, but see the facilities. And it was totally fascinating.
Um,
And she took me for a
your
ride.
very own Paris, like you own a horse named Paris, right?
Well, her real name is Perestroika, and we spell her name Paras.
But that's true in the book and also in your real life.
Yes.
But also in your real life, didn't your Paris race for a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. Not She didn't seem to know or care what she was doing.
Which is not true of your Paris. But anyway, okay.
I
Well,
fictionalized her career.
so she
So
wouldn't recognize herself and be
yeah.
upset.
So speaking of recognizing herself, I have to tell this story. So a couple of days ago, I was at the barn, and I was leading Paris around for a walk and a little graze. And a friend of mine came by, and I wanted to give her a copy of the book. So I handed her the lead rope because the cars were too close together for Paris to come with me to the car. So I went to the car and I got the book, and I turned around and I held it up. And guess who comes running toward me, just like with her eyes wide open, just like that. And it just made me laugh. And I thought, yep, she recognizes herself. She looked at it, she sniffed it all over. It was
Oh,
we
that's
just laughed.
wonderful. Well, I don't know what you're going to read, but you render her very beautifully. I mean, she's a beautiful creature in the way you have rendered her. She's just
Well,
lovely.
she is a sweetheart. You know, she's very curious. She is very curious. She is very active, but she's very kind, and she never wants to hurt anybody. And a lot of horses are like that. They know how to hurt people and they don't. And she's like that. So I'm crazy about her. She's been the most eccentric in some ways of all my horses, but she's also been a great companion. I have to admit this. I hate to admit it in public, but I have to admit this. I love talking to the animal communicator, because lots of times the animal communicator says very funny things.
What do you mean by the animal
Oh,
communicator?
it's supposedly a person who has psychic insights into what horses or dogs or other animals are thinking. And you ask questions, and then the horse funnels the answers through the animal communicator.
I was going to ask you if, in fact, as in the book, you ever had called an animal psychic. So this is one of my questions. So, like, do you you have it's a 900 number or something, or you have an account where you?
No, it's somebody I make an appointment with. And if something curious is going on, and do I believe them? I have no idea, but it's so amusing to talk to them that it's worth the money. And I have to say, I've had many funny episodes with the animal communicator. But with regard to Paris, when I talked to her most recently, Paris asked why she can't live in our house with us. and I said, well, there's too many stairs. And she basically said, I can do stairs.
Oh my gosh, that is.
Do I believe her? I have no idea.
Has she ever met Paris, the
No.
animal communicator? So this is all just she's connecting at a very high level.
Yeah, she lives over on the east side of the state, over around Fresno, Sacramento, that area. So no, she's never met Paris or anything. But I have so many funny animal communication stories. I'm not even going to get started on, but so many. And everybody I know has funny ones. Everybody I know. So we don't do it a whole lot, but we do it from time to time, and sometimes we learn something.
Well, in the book, and I don't want to give too much away, but the animal communicator in the book is spot on. And one of my favorite scenes is when Paris does happen to be living in a house. And
fulfilling her dream. Yes.
Yes.
Her dream.
And I love how you well, there are certain things about this novel that are fantastical. Not least the fact that everybody is so kind and wants to be helpful to the other, which in this day and age feels completely fantastical.
Animals do like to cooperate. Maybe the hardest part is finding people who are willing to cooperate. Mm-hmm. But the people in the book are basically decent people.
They are.
And I'm glad. I like that.
Well, it must have been soothing to write, I would think, in this time. But
Well, yes, I enjoyed it a lot.
you could tell, and but I appreciate also, even though the horse living in the house is maybe somewhat fantastical, that you take care of the detail of her excretion. You don't gloss over that. So anyway, okay. So do you want to read a little bit?
Sure. I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 3. I don't like to start at the beginning every time I read something. So I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 3. And this takes place once she is near the Eiffel Tower. And things have changed around the Eiffel Tower since I set this book there in 2008. So it's not exactly the same as it was. Excuse me, but I hope you can imagine it. The pond beside the great four-legged brilliant thing that Paris could not see to the top of was inside a low fence. But this time, the footing of the approach was fine. Paris backed off 5 strides or so and popped over it. The grass inside the fence was rich and deep, and the water in the pond was good enough. In Paris's experience, everywhere you went, the taste of water was different. Here it was rich and dirty, but with a sweetness too. She was thirsty and drank her fill. Frida's a German short-haired pointer. Frida soon appeared, and she too jumped the fence. Her form was good, Paris thought, in spite of the weight of the purse between her jaws. Knees tucked, a little kick of the hind legs to clear the top metal bits. Frida took a drink. And then the screaming began. Paris was startled and snorted and reared, but Raoul, now this is a raven that they've recently met, who floated in, wings stretched, and landed on a low branch overhanging the pond, cawed dismissively and said, "Mallards, common, anas platycyrrhynchos." Sure enough, the screecher was a shining green duck, plump and well preened. He waddled toward them, stopped, and screamed again. Behind him was a duller bird. Raoul said, "She'd be the wife." Sniffed. The wife quacked several times. "I don't think you should do that, honey. I think we should mind our own business. Lower your voice. Look at her. She eats grass. What's the harm?" Paris walked along the edge of the pond. It was entirely fenced in, but the fence was low and there was plenty of vegetation. She could see that dawn was approaching, and this seemed a favorable place to take another rest. Frida yawned. Paris yawned. Paris went to a spot in the lee of a wall, lay down, and curled up. Frida hid the purse and then lay down beside her. As she drifted off, Paris realized that her decision had been made. The Mallards were named Sid and Nancy. Sid allowed Paris and Frida to sleep. He had other matters to attend to, particularly preening, which was time-consuming, but if you wanted to swim, it had to be done. When the horse and dog woke up, though, he felt that he had to make explicit his view that they had invaded his territory. He screamed himself hoarse in spite of Nancy's incessant advice to calm down. Finally, he flew away. Nancy sighed, shook her head, and flew after him. Late in the night, they came back. The horse and the dog were still there, and so was the raven. Ravens, in Sid's experience, lived off the efforts of others and considered themselves very smart. He pondered screaming at the raven too, but he suspected that the raven would ignore him or perhaps get some other ravens and mob him. That would not be a pleasant experience. Sid decided to keep his trap shut. Nancy, he could see, was relieved. I really had a lot of, pardon?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I really had a lot of fun doing the Mallards. I
Well,
looked up
Sid
dusk.
and Nancy alone. I mean,
Let's say that these are the reincarnations of the real Sid and Nancy. This is what happened to them. This is what they had to put up with once they did all those things that they did.
so a couple of things in writing animals as as you do. I would imagine that one of the challenges is figuring out how far you can go in terms of requiring the reader to suspend their disbelief. And so did you just kind of just full throttle and do it, or were you concerned about that issue? Did you fret?
From the beginning, my main plan was to amuse myself.
Uh-huh.
And so that's what your editor is for. After you've amused yourself as much as you can, then your editor's job is to come in and say, I don't believe this. I don't believe this. I don't believe this.
Huh.
So then you have to do the research and make it plausible. You don't have to exactly make it, you have to make it as true as you can. I always believe that. You have to make it as true as you can. So you have to do the research to do that. But you also have to make it entertaining so that if the reader comes to a place where he or she just doesn't believe it, they want to go on anyway because it's amusing to them or there's suspense or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So with other books, I always have the same issue. Every book anybody writes, you have the issue of, is it as accurate as you can make it, given the subject you've chosen?
True, but I mean, you do have a dog carrying a purse and understanding money, which you explain very well why she knows about money. But I also think one of the things that you did was show the humans' reactions to these animals, and I especially love Aeneas's. She sees the horse and she just says, well, it's a visitation basically, and it's a spiritual experience, and I'm not gonna question it. And that was wonderfully done.
Thank you. I enjoyed that part a lot. Now, Frida, with regard to the purse, I have to say that Frida is based on the German shorthaired that we had, and she loved carrying things. And so if my husband took her to the beach, the first thing she would do would be to pick up a rock and carry it around all over the beach. Occasionally she'd put it down, but then she'd pick it up again. And we don't know why she loved carrying things around, but she did. So I felt, okay, well, why can't she have some money if she needs it? What good is a rock? Also was a really good hunter. And it was almost as if she couldn't help herself. One time I was walking with her at the beach and she just ran toward, I think it was a seagull sitting on the beach. And she touched it, but she didn't catch it, thank goodness. But she was an avid hunter.
Do you think that, as you say in the book, that a rat would have tasted bitter to her? She doesn't want to eat a rat. Is that something that you imagined, or do you know that to be true?
No, I don't know that to be true. I mean, I saw her from time to time go after ground squirrels, but she didn't have to hunt for food. So I'm just assuming that the rat would taste bitter.
Mm-hmm. Cats kind of get short shrift here.
Well, somebody has to. You're going to have a rat as one of your characters, then I guess cats have to, be the one to step up to the plate and take the blame.
Were there books from your childhood that you loved that informed this book?
Well, I liked any books about animals, but I can't think of any specific one. that informed it. But I loved Black Beauty. I loved any books that talked about animals. And I loved movies like The Lady and the Tramp. That was probably one of the first movies that I just remembered for the rest of my life. So, so yeah, I loved animals, and I read lots of books about animals.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I had lots of little things. The Secret Garden came to mind. Stuart Little came to mind. Um, Rumor Gardens, the Holly and the Ivy. I don't know, but there were certain sentences that had the cadences of Rumor Garden, and
Oh, really?
yeah, and so anyway, it was nice to have those pings. I love Paris's sensibility. I mean, she is our heroine, but she's very insightful, and she's empathetic, and um there's many great things that she says, but one of the interesting things is that she notes that a dog is ill at ease without a human, and that dogs and humans are companions, whereas horses and humans are co-workers. And do you think that horses have a sense of that in real
Well,
life?
I know that my experience of horses is that they understand that cooperation is good for them.
Hmm.
And they've also evolved to cooperate with people.
Hmm.
Um, I have never had the experience of training or riding wild horses, so I don't know about that. I haven't had that experience. But the one they have different temperaments, and sometimes they are, as you might say, contrary, and they need to be trained. But you can always tell that some are really willing to go along with the program. And they, I had one horse who has since died, and he would be eating his hay, and he'd see me coming, and he'd be shaking his head and saying, let's go," because he wanted to get out of the paddock. He was in a nice big turnout, but he wanted to get out of there and do something.
Uh-huh.
And so I've often said there's play horses and there's food horses. And the play horses don't mind leaving the hay behind if they can go check something out, or have some fun, or now I also give out a lot of treats. I totally believe in treats. But in the horses that I've had, especially as an adult, have been cooperative and interested in doing things, and um, very pleasant to be around.
You talk about in 13 Ways, you talk about how one of the, and maybe that's the horse you're talking about, was your muse for Horse Heaven, and that you wrote that book. Well, you had become involved with the Course of Miracles, which changed your entire way of thinking and being. And I remember reading the sentence in the introduction to 13 Ways, and you said once you came upon the Course of Miracles, you thought, well, maybe I don't have to write novels anymore because I have a certain calm and peace, and just being, what? That can't. And then you become and then you recall that your mother said that horses were going to wreck your life if you continued to be horsey. And then you grew up and were a writer, and she was happy and you were happy, and then you became preoccupied with horses again, and you thought, well, maybe this is like, I don't need to write novels because I have the horsey thing. But then you fell and broke your leg, so then you couldn't ride horses, so then you wrote Horse Heaven. And you say in 13 Ways that your way of approaching the writing had changed, and there was a zone of randomness, I think you say, and you had never worked in that way before. And I wonder if that zone of randomness has persisted,
Oh,
or it.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when I started out with my writing career, I had a plan. And it came from reading lots and lots of Shakespeare. Because one of the things I noticed about Shakespeare was that he wrote comedies, he wrote tragedies, He wrote romances. And then I went on and read the Norse sagas, and I found the genre of the epic. And so from my earliest time as a writer, I wanted to try writing a comedy, a romance, a tragedy, and an epic. And I knew, because I'd taken so many courses in Old Norse and Icelandic and those languages, I knew the epic was going to be the Greenlanders.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew I was absolutely not prepared to write that book. So I had to do some practicing and write other novels in order to get there. And so I did. And so then once I had done the epic, which was the Greenlanders, the tragedy, which was 1,000 Acres, the comedy, which was Moo, and the romance, which was The All True Travels and Adventures of Liddy Newton, I thought, okay, what next? And I wanted to write about horses. And so I decided to write a combination book, which was Horse Heaven, that had a tragic horse, an epic horse, a comic horse, a romantic horse, but also a realist horse and a fantasy horse. And so that was really, really fun. I really enjoyed that. And so then when I was done with that, I sort of looked around and said, what's next? And other ideas came to me. But I should say about A Course in Miracles that when they started arguing about who gets all the money, I bailed on them. They had a big fight over who owned the copyright to the book.
Oh.
And it was all about the money. And I thought, well, I thought they were enlightened, but I guess not.
Oh, how disappointing.
Yeah, it was sad.
Huh. So do you feel that you have cracked every nut?
I don't know. There's so many nuts lying around. I don't know yet.
I mean, do you think of, have you written screenplays?
Oh,
Yeah.
I tried that, but it wasn't, it was a nightmare.
And
You don't have any independence if you're writing a screenplay.
Uh-huh.
And I decided that just wasn't for me.
Uh-huh. There's always kabuki theater, I suppose.
I've never tried writing a play either. The novel is just always has been my most natural form.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do.
Uh-huh. I was surprised in the 13 Ways in that introduction that you said, you used the word frightened quite a bit. You were frightened that you weren't any good. You were frightened that the book wasn't good. And I have always, although I don't know you, I have thought of you as being intrepid and certain, not in an arrogant way, but just so, brilliant and capable. And if I were your horse, I would do whatever you said. So, and I read somewhere about this new book, that you said you were frightened to hand it into your editor, and I just thought, how could Smiley be frightened?
Well, I do have a personal characteristic, which is to anticipate that bad things are going to happen, and then I start doing it, and the bad things sort of fade away.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what that's from. I don't know if that's nature or nurture. I don't know if that's because when I was in elementary school, I was the girl with the most tardies on my report card. Some things make me nervous and other things don't. Talking in front of an audience never makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Writing the book itself doesn't make me nervous once I've gotten started.
Mm-hmm.
But being late makes me nervous.
I see. Many years ago in 1988, you came to Webster's in Milwaukee and did a reading for, I think, Ordinary Love and Goodwill. And
That would have been 89 because
okay.
88 was when the Greenlanders came out.
Okay, so in '89, and I met you, and you were very generous, and you came to the farm where I live, and I remember you got little brown bags of many different varieties of apples, and you were very interested in all the different varieties, and you took
I
them
love
home.
apples.
So, but I had just published my first book, and I said that I'd written a million drafts. Now, I've been waiting for 30 years to ask you this. This is how I remember it. I said, "Oh, I wrote a million drafts." And you said, "Oh, you'll work your way out of needing to do that, and then you'll just," and I just thought, "Wait, are you telling me, Jane Smiley, that you write those perfect sentences without a lot of revision? Is that what you're saying?" And
It
um,
varies from book to book.
okay, well, that's the comfort.
Yeah, it really varies from book to book. And the one that was the most difficult was Private Life. And that I wrote, I thought I knew how to write a book when I was writing Private Life, but I could not, it took me a really long time to make that come together. And it was partly because the husband of the woman who's the main character, I kept thinking of him as a crackpot. And it was very hard for me to try and get into his inner life. And it took a lot of drafts for me to understand why he is the way he is.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So yeah, that was the most difficult one. And others that I would have thought were really going to be difficult, namely the Greenlanders. It was like putting on my polar bear skin rug and being wafted away to a different
Oh,
world.
how
It
wonderful.
blew me away I mean, it took me 50 pages of writing to get into it, but then zip, it was almost scary how I got swept away.
Oh, that sounds like really a lot of fun.
So every book has been different. Mood just made me laugh and laugh and laugh. And, some books have been lots of fun. Some books have been more like a puzzle. Some books have been sort of head scratchers.
Hmm.
But once I get going, I can't let it drop. I have to stick with it.
Hmm. Hmm. There's questions here. Have you been able to take a different perspective on writing since you are now a successful writer? As you say, you write this book to amuse yourself. Was that always the case?
I never wrote any books in order to make money. I just wrote them and hoped for the best. And one of the reasons that I've jumped around from one genre to the other is because it didn't interest me to keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, I would always hope that they might sell and might make some money, but mostly it was because I was so interested in a particular issue or subject or place or idea that I just couldn't let it go.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've lucked out on that with that regard, because I have been able to do what I wanted. Now, I should say that my history teacher from 8th grade, may she rest in peace, did write on my report card, "She only does what she wants to do." And I don't know how my mother saw that, but when I saw it later on in my life, I thought, oh, lucky me. Compliment.
That's well, if your student is interested in history and you're the history teacher, you're in luck.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I admire about this book is the concision, and there's this wonderful passage about the madam, the old madam, and you go through her history in one short paragraph and kill off every family member except your great grandson, and just boom, 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 and it's a beautiful example of distillation.
Well, one of the things that you think about if you're studying France in the 20th century is, wow, how bad could it be?
Uh-huh.
You know, and that that was something that I had to pay attention to.
Uh-huh.
So here was a woman who some people would say had lived a privileged lifestyle, and yet she had undergone so many losses, and she had put up with so many changes in her life, and that made her a poignant character for me.
Mhm.
And she's learned from that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What lessons did you learn from your parents about reading and writing?
Well, the lesson I learned from my mother about writing, my mother was a journalist. She worked for the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. She was the women's page editor. And I learned that you had deadlines and you had to do it. I think she wanted to write her great novel, but in the end, she didn't complete it. But when I was growing up, when I was really young, there was always the typewriter on the table, and there was always mom sitting down to finish her work, whatever it was. About reading, they let me read whatever I wanted. I just they always bought the books. They always, my favorite way to read when I was young was with a flashlight under the covers. And I know mom saw it. I know mom saw the light of the flashlight, but she never stopped me. She never said, you have to stop and go to sleep. She just let me keep on. And I remember when I was probably 13, I became totally addicted to Agatha Christie mysteries. So much so that I would go to the library, the St. Louis County Library, and I would lie on the floor in the fiction section, read my Agatha Christie mystery, and then sometimes I would check it out. And finally, my mom happened to come into the library, and the librarian said, "Is that all right with you that she's reading this?" And mom said, "Sure, she can read whatever she wants." And so, yeah, I was encouraged to read, and I was an only child of a single mother, and maybe that's how I stayed out of her hair.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Was that I read all the time.
Someone wonders what inspired you to get a PhD, and is it in English?
Well, my PhD was in English with a creative dissertation. And one of the things I loved about taking courses in graduate school at the University of Iowa was I loved Old English, Old High German, Old Norse, Old Norse, Old Norse. I loved all those old languages, but I did not want to write a dissertation in medieval history. I did go to Iceland on a fellowship. What is it, a Fulbright? I went to Iceland on a Fulbright, and while I was there, I wrote fiction. And then when I came home, and I had been in the Iowa Writers Workshop, I just asked if I could submit a creative dissertation. They said, yeah. In fact, one of the teachers said the last thing he wanted to do was read another dissertation about the Icelandic sagas. So that was fine with him.
Just back to the beginning, did you ever repeat the experience of the onion soup, or
Oh yes, I've been back to that patisserie a number of times.
and did it live up to your expectations?
Oh yes, and
Oh,
they
good.
also there's also a lovely bakery that's kind of part of the restaurant that has wonderful macarons, and so yes, it's a great place to go get a bite to eat.
And the fennel, was it the fennel seed something or others that an Aeneas made?
Yes. Um, I love fennel. I love licorice flavor and I love fennel seed and yes, she made I've never eaten those, but I imagined her making little treats with a fennel taste. I understand from others that some people don't like licorice or fennel, but I do. So
Do you think that that if there were some animals like your characters who had the wherewithal to do so, that in real life Paris would afford them the kind of wilderness that they were able to carve out in that neighborhood?
well,
Or
that neighborhood is quite interesting because it's a huge open space called the Champ de Mars, and so the tower is at one end, and the old military École Militaire is at the far end. But it's really huge, and cars do go through it. There are cars that go through it. Then across the river, there are two museums at the top of the hill, right at the Place du Trocadero. But there's a huge park that goes up the hill.
Mhm.
And then beyond the Square du Trocadero, there's a few houses, and then there's the Bois de Boulogne. So there's a way that that place is more natural and wilder than the more downtown parts, the Montparnasse or places like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Someone wonders if you ever get writer's block, and if you do, is there something you do to get past it? You go ride your horse, is what
Well,
I'm
that's
thinking.
true. Um, the thing to do, I think, if I don't call it writer's block. I just say, okay, I don't know what's next. So basically, what I do is I set the manuscript aside and for the time being and do some more research. And if I can, which you can't do anymore for the time being, but I will. I'll go to that place wherever the setting is, and I'll walk around, and that'll give me some ideas.
Mhm.
But I also think, and I say this in 13 ways, as you're writing the book, especially the first draft, you have to be very forgiving of yourself. You cannot be a perfectionist. You have to um, just take what you can get and put it on the page because you don't know ahead of time what actually is going to blossom into a good idea.
Mhm.
There are some books where I started out with one idea and I ended up with a slightly different book just from learning about the thing that I was writing about. Um, so you have to be pretty open minded and you have to be pretty self forgiving.
Mhm.
And you have to be ready to entertain new thoughts. And so that's what I like. That's worked for me.
And you have to be willing to enter the point of view of a rat, as it seemed to me that you did very well. And you came up with the rat's philosophy: life is short, tunnels are long. You must have felt good when that came out.
I did. I loved. I didn't know there were going to be rats in the book, but you walk around the Champ de Mars and you look at the houses, especially back in 2008, that it was evident that the houses had been there for a really long time.
Mhm.
And so when I thought about, okay, this is a house that's essentially abandoned. There's the great grandmother and the little boy who live here, but they've closed off most of the rooms. Um, and so of course there's going to be rats somewhere.
Mhm.
So probably in the walls. And then that got me going about the rats and what they would want and what they would like and what is it? Okay, if you're a rat and that means you're a small animal, what is it that helps you survive? And I figured that would be a kind of sense what we would call a sixth sense about your environment and the world. And so that's why I stuck some of those things in about the rat.
That was very nice. And also, I feel that I myself have an aversion to rodents. And so it was good for me to consider the beauty of a rat. And that, Etienne goes over and touches his fluffy white belly, which was silky. So I have a new appreciation for rats. I think we're almost done here, but let's see. We've got, of all your novels, do you have a favorite character you've written?
Oh, it's definitely Paris. It's definitely Perestroika. I've liked a lot of the characters. It's funny. You take a shine to certain of your characters as you're writing about them, and they aren't necessarily the ones that you expect to be very fond of. I remember in the trilogy, I came to feel the Langdon family was like my family, and I wasn't very fond of my immediate siblings, but I was quite fond of the in-laws. Um, I strongly disapproved of Frank, who was the main pole,
Uh-huh.
but I loved Andy. And I liked Lillian, but I totally was enamored of Arthur, So I thought that was an interesting aspect of living with these people for such a long time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I stopped believing that I was making them up, and I started feeling like I was overhearing them and eavesdropping on them. And I thought that was an interesting experience.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I'll say. You were kind of like the communicator.
Yeah, the animal communicator, the character communicator. That's me.
So let's see, last, which is kind of a nice way to end. What kind of books do you read, or what are you reading now?
Well, right now I'm setting up. I teach creative writing at UC Riverside, so I am setting up what the books will be for the spring or for the winter term, actually. So I reread Animal Farm. I thought that was fascinating. I hadn't read that since I was a kid.
Mm.
I picked up a book called I Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. I hadn't read that, and I read it, and I thought it was amazingly interesting. What else am I reading? I just started reading the new book about Shakespeare's son called Hamnet.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, I haven't gotten very far so far, but it's really fascinating.
I know you're a fan of apples, and there's a great scene in the Apple storeroom, which I think you will enjoy.
The Apple Store. Oh, in Hamnet.
Hamnet, yeah.
Oh,
I wanted to ask you there. You mentioned one of the apples that Paris eats is a Renetta Cusi in the book.
yes.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, Renette. But so what kind of apple is that?
I don't know. I had to find a French. I haven't eaten that. I had to find a French variety.
I see.
She just couldn't. I didn't see how it was possible for her to eat an Arkansas black. Or God forbid, the
Honey crisp.
Well, in California, my favorite pie apple is a Gravenstein, which is a specifically California apple. So that's what I usually make pies out of, especially in the summer. But I do love a lot of different kinds, and I do love Arkansas blacks. What kind do you have on your orchard?
Well, we have many antique varieties as well as the ones that you would expect, and it continues to astonish us how crazy people are for the Honeycrisp, which is they're actually quite difficult. They're very temperamental.
Oh, they are. Huh.
Yeah, they're hard. There's a lot of stuff you have to do to keep them happy, and So
Name one of your antique varieties that maybe I don't know yet.
we have golden russets, seek no further, the Tallman Sweet, the McMahon.
No further. I really sounds great.
Yeah, it is. It is one of the perks of living on a farm like this is that there's always something good to eat. But anyway, Jane Smiley, thank you for all the pleasure that you have brought us, all the joy through all the years, and I hope that there'll be many more books to come. And thank you for coming to Wisconsin. And
I hope to get back. I hope to.
Yes, we want you to come back.
I love Wisconsin. We were just there. I went to Clearwater Camp up in Aqua when I was a kid, and my daughter and I were there not too long ago for a big camp reunion. So that was about a year and 2.5 years ago, I think. And so I love coming back to Wisconsin.
Ellen, thank you for all of you for being present.
Yes, thank you. There were more than 200 people joined us tonight to watch such a lovely conversation. Jane Hamilton, thank you so much for your questions, and Jane Smiley, thank you so much both for this book and for your very thoughtful answers tonight. That is a wrap on the 2020 Wisconsin Book Festival. I want to thank all of the more than 11,000 people who tuned in to watch book events all year long. I also want to just say again, we will be hosting Emily St. John Mandel in conversation with Chloe Benjamin on February 16th. So, read this book, read, Jane Hamilton's books, and maybe read The Glass Hotel before we get to that. Everybody have a great winter. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to many, many more evenings like this in 2021. Thank you so much, Jane.
Thank you. Bye, Jane. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Jane.
Bye.
Bye-bye.